reporting on the games you love by people who love to game. The MMO Reporter Network. Hey everybody, Chris here from MMO Reporter, and I am lucky enough to have one of the developers for Path of Exile on the line here. Hello Chris, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. I have to say, fantastic name. I think you hit it out of the ballpark right off the bat.
Yours also?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So before we start hugging each other too much virtually, can you let us know what your title is on the game?
So I'm the managing director at Grinding Gear Games, and I was one of the founders of the company, so I've been working on Path of Exile since day one, and hopefully till the last day.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Now, can you for some of our listeners who may not know the game, can you give us an elevator pitch about what is Path of Exile?
So Path of Exile is an online dark fantasy action RPG, and it's set in the dark world of Rayclast, and basically you play as an exile who's committed some crimes and been sent to Rayclast to survive for yourself, and you kill monsters and find items and build your character up over many levels. And the short version of why people play Path of Exile is the immense character customization. Basically, it's the game if you want to have variety in how you build your character. There's crazy combos of items and deep mechanics to get into, and there's a lot of choice in this game. We have hundreds of gems that interact with each other, and you can combine them, and there's a passive skill tree with 1,400 nodes, and the list goes on, but it's basically a game about character customization and killing monsters.
Right, and doing my research for this, one of my staff described the passive skill tree as massive, absolutely massive, and I looked at a few of the YouTube videos, and as people scrolled out to show the entire skill tree, that it really is something that is quite massive. And what was your approach when you were developing the game for being able to have so much customization, yet still making it something manageable for players to be able to jump into and understand?
The skill tree took a lot of iterations. I mean, it's on version like 15 at the moment, where there's been a lot of full redesigns in there. But the difficulty there has been getting it so that it's understandable to new players, because as you can see, it's a little intimidating for some people, but it's undergone a lot of improvement over time so that it's something that presents you with a reasonable set of choices at any one time, so you can make a choice out of only 3 or 4 things, and you gradually gain understanding of that. And we found it really helps to have larger, like literally visibly more noticeable nodes on the tree, which have special art on them and a really clear theme. So you can say, oh, I want to use swords, and there's a whole bunch of sword stuff over that way, and it kind of pushes you in one direction, but you still have the flexibility to go and try any other crazy combo if you decide to be a sword plus zombies kind of guy.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I found out as well is that the skills are socketed. That's where you're talking about the gems, right?
Yes.
And any class can use any skill.
That's correct, though some are better than others because of where they are on the passive tree.
Right.
So, for example, if you want to specialize in minion summoning, then there are different ways you can approach it depending on what your class is. If you're playing like a nimble ranger, for example, you're going to have a pretty different experience than if you're playing a witch who has quite a lot of skills specifically about buffing their summons.
Okay. And that must be absolutely, it's mind-boggling trying to think about trying to balance out the different classes and the amount of different customizability that players can have. I mean, you must have had people as you were iterating on that passive skill trees just absolutely breaking the game with things that you hadn't thought of.
Yep, there are some pretty strong examples in there of places where people have just come up with stuff that blew our mind. There's weird interactions that you don't expect, that where something's classified as something you're not considering, and so it works with some interaction elsewhere. Like if your minions explode on death, doing damage based on their life, and something you didn't think is a minion is technically a minion, and for some archaic technical reason has like 1,000,000 life, because that's a reasonable value if you don't expect it to ever matter, and then suddenly it's doing a percentage of that to monsters, the game is quite broken in that case. So we've had to fix some of those kind of things in the past, yes.
Yeah, and you've been quite active as well in doing content updates throughout the game. I think we're looking at already 3 expansions have already come out for the game. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep, this is our 4th expansion that we're promoting at the moment.
So tell us about that. What is this new expansion that you've got coming out?
So the new expansion is called Path of Exile Ascendancy, and it's all about this Emperor Azaro who decided that he wasn't able to father a worthy successor to his crown, so he decided to make a crazy labyrinth in order to test the population and find someone who was worthy of becoming emperor. And so the expansion involves the players getting to earn the right through a bunch of trials to enter the labyrinth and then get their hands dirty trying to get through some traps, trap gauntlets to fight Emperor Azaro himself and hopefully come out victorious on the other end. But if they do so, they actually get to specialize in a subclass, which is a new thing for Path of Exile. We've added 19 different Ascendancy classes so that you can take, say, your duelist and specialize in being a gladiator or a champion or a slayer. And each of the classes has 3 subclasses like that they can pick to further double down on specific specializations.
Wow. So that, again, that must make things even more massive. Are you increasing the size of the passive skill tree?
So the way we've done that is that each of the Ascendancy classes is kind of a smaller skill tree that slots into the existing one next to your class's start location. So it isn't particularly large compared to the existing tree, but all of the nodes in it are good ones. So it's a very punchy way of adding a lot of character to your class.
Right. So does that mean that this is going to be something where if I choose one particular subclass, that's going to lock out all the other subclasses' skills for my use?
That's correct. So it is a case of having class-specific stuff, which is new for Path of Exile because the versatility that we've had in the past, as well as being an amazing boon, was also a bit of a negative in some ways because it meant that you could kind of build your summoner as any type of class. But now there are very, very interesting ways you can specialize a summoner that lock out other possibilities. So there's a bit of mutual exclusivity going on there, which is a fascinating thing to design around.
And was that sort of this idea of the specificity of having these specific skills, was that why you decided to go this way, to be able to have those characters have, like you said, a little more punch to each of the skills that are in there? Was that the sort of trade-off from what you'd done so far of having everybody be able to do everything, whether it was a great idea or not?
Right, yeah, and we've tried to put a few places in there where characters have things they don't normally specialize in available as one of the minor aspects of one of these subclasses, so it's still adding more variety. It's not completely boring where the melee guy gets three different ways to melee. He's now getting certain specializations and things he didn't specialize in before. And this means that we also get a story to tell with these subclasses, where each one of them is really evocative. Like the Necromancer has an army of undead minions in various ways that she can be affected by spells that normally affect her minions and that kind of stuff. So if a player picks that, he kind of knows, I'm going to be a Necromancer now, I'm going to get in character and play this way because the game's giving me a lot of different ways to express that.
And have you built the systems in such a way that you're not limiting yourself in future content updates if you decide that, as great as this idea is, and it does sound fascinating to me, maybe you find that the player base just isn't reacting to being locked into these specific subclasses. Are you going to be able to go back to the old model with the next expansion if that's what your player base wants?
That's a really good question, actually. And we've tried to make sure that when designing these, that they're not something that's absolutely mandatory. It is possible to play without using them, and it is possible for us to add more in the future if we need to. So if there's any kind of problem there, we're not afraid to rebalance around it, but we're expecting the players will really like it. There's a lot of new toys for them to play with in these Ascendancy classes.
Well, and with the amount of content that you've put out in the last couple of years, I mean, you have a lot of experience at presenting things to your players and seeing what their reactions are. So I'm sure that you went into this with a lot of knowledge and forethought as to what this was going to do for the game. Now, you mentioned the trials at the very beginning. Now, with all the content that's coming through, is it the trials to get into the maze to then get through to that end part, is that sort of an equal part of the game, or are the different content chunks equally spread out, or do you have to sort of do that trial, then you get into the maze, that's the big thing, and then there's the stuff at the end? Or is it, you get through the trials, the maze, and then that's all the content that you really want?
So the labyrinth is the bulk of the content here. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of character customization in the Ascendancy classes, but in terms of actual stuff to play through and monsters to kill, the labyrinth is where a lot of the action is. The trials at the beginning take only a few minutes to complete each, and there are 6 of them, so that's only about 20 minutes of playtime, but it's spread throughout the game where you encounter them every, say, hour or two as you're playing through. There'll be a trial, and once you completed all 6, it means that once you get to Act 3 Town, you can go and do the maze. And the labyrinth itself changes its layout every single day. So the random level generation will mean that the sequence of areas is completely different. There are secret passages connecting ones that weren't previously connected. There might be a fork in the road where you can go in 2 different directions. Maybe there's a key that only works in 1 of 3 doors. So there's a lot of different ways that it varies, and we're expecting the players to communicate that amongst each other so they can kind of try to work out the best way through today's labyrinth.
You got a little Maze Runner vibe going on there.
Yep. Well, it's easy to draw inspiration from pop culture.
Exactly. So you've got the players going through the story content, and once they've completed that, what are you looking at? Is it going back into the labyrinth? That's going to be the repeatable content to keep players going until the next expansion comes out?
Right, so Path of Exile already has a lot of repeatable content. We just wanted to add more. So while we, would normally be happy with letting the players repeat the stuff they're currently repeating, we thought adding a labyrinth as an additional option would give them something else to do in the meantime, especially because there's actually another reward in addition to the Ascendancy class thing, which you get every time you complete the labyrinth. And this is designed for the type of player who wants to, just play the labyrinth 4 or 5 hours every day, because some people do. So in this particular case, you get the ability to add a special property to one of your items that causes cool things to happen during combat. Like it might summon some blades out of nowhere that attack your enemies, or cause a meteor to rain down occasionally, or cause projectiles to bounce around between them. And you get a chance at putting this on your gloves, for example. And then if you don't like it, if you want one that's more synergized with your build, you can run the labyrinth again and get another random one that overwrites the current one. And there's hundreds of these available throughout the game in the different difficulty levels. So if you get lucky, you can get ones that are really powerful, and if you're unlucky, you get one that's not particularly useful for you.
And are you able to? Does it automatically overwrite the previous ones, or are you able to kind of keep them in your inventory for later use?
You can put them on multiple items to keep the old ones around, or if you only care about one item, you can overwrite the one that's on that.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a ton of stuff here for players to do. Now, and again, this is my lack of experience with the game speaking here. Does all the old content scale to the new power level of the players? Like
we've put some work into.
Sorry,
that's a really good question. We've put some work into rebalancing around the fact that people are now going to have these Ascendancy classes and new mods. And with each expansion, we try to do any rebalance that we felt is necessary since the last one, because we've learned if you screw around with the balance constantly while people are playing the game on a daily basis, they get a bit frustrated. Mm-hmm. So we make a list of things that need some work, and then when an expansion like this comes along, we rebalance it to make sure that they're taken into account. And there's a number of areas, like there's a complete rework to how poison works in our game. We've tried very hard to make it so poison is a thing you can just specialize in, and there's tons of cool poison stuff you can do. And in doing so, we can slip in the game being slightly harder in certain ways, so that now the players are more powerful, they're still challenged at the high levels.
Right. And so they're going to be going through the labyrinth. They're going to be getting the powers at the end of the labyrinth. They're going to be getting, I'm assuming, gear or gems or new skills and stuff like that as they go through the labyrinth as well.
Yes, you can definitely find new skills as you go along. It's kind of up to the whim of the randomness of whether or not you find them, but we're adding a bunch of new skills in the expansion.
Can you give us a couple of examples?
So an example, the first one I want to bring up is Earthquake. And Earthquake is a melee attack which causes an initial, explosion of physical damage, but then a few seconds later there's a second explosion if there are still monsters around to receive it. And this is more interesting than the face value of, doing damage twice, because you can, in Path of Exile, you can trigger certain effects on things like hitting enemies. So if you have an effect like, say, Fortify, which causes you to take a lot less damage for a few seconds, and you combine that with Earthquake, then the few seconds triggers twice in succession, and so you get a much longer period of invulnerability from it.
So speaking of sort of joining your own skills together, or synergies at least, between all the different skills that you have, do you do anything for groups or for parties where different skills can interact together?
Typically, you'll find that things like status elements, an enemy being frozen, for example, there are a lot of ways to take advantage of that. But for a single player, that's often difficult because you have to both cause a status effect and get in there to take advantage. So with a party, well-synergized characters can do more than just directly buff each other. They can create complicated situations where the enemies are frozen at the right times, or maybe there are poisoned enemies or bleeding enemies, and there are a lot of similar status effects where you can trigger interesting stuff to happen if you have the help to do it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And that sounds really interesting. My wife and I like to play together, and our friends and the staff at the network and stuff like that, we all play together. And we're always, we go into a new MMO or a new game, and we're thinking, okay, what's going to work well together? So it sounds like we can really, think things through beforehand and pick classes and go through the game in such a way that we're really building a party that works well together.
That's right, so you can play the Labyrinth together. It supports up to 6 people in one group, and it's certainly a lot harder when you're playing through as a party because we ramp the difficulty up, but we're planning on having a leaderboard that ranks people's playthroughs on a given day, so of course as you work on it a few times, you can get a better and better time and show people just how good you are.
Right, and you've had leagues that run for a few months or so in the past, right? This is something that's regular for the game? And how do those work?
So basically, they're like a fresh start if you want to play in the league. So when you come to Path of Exile, you have a choice. You can either play in the old league, which where everyone else is, or you can play in the new one where everyone's getting a fresh start. And we find it's like 2/3 in the new and 1/3 in the old, typically. And the challenge leagues, as they're called, which are the fresh start ones, generally have a property that makes the game more interesting and difficult. For example, we're starting one in 3 weeks now called Talisman, where you can find all these cool talismans from monsters that possess them in different ways. And these challenge leagues generally run for around 3 months, sometimes 4 months, and they provide an opportunity for returning players to know that they're getting a level playing field. If you've played Path of Exile a year ago, you don't want to come back to it because everyone else is going to be far ahead of you, but you feel that you could compete with them on fair playing field, then that's a reason to come back for the challenge leagues.
Oh, cool. And you've got different difficulty levels as well, right? I think normal, cruel, and merciless.
That's right. And you play through the game sequentially. So you finish normal, you've done its labyrinth, you've fought the end boss, you've seen the story, then you play it again on cruel where it's a lot harder, and then finally on merciless.
Okay. So if you've gone through with your character and you get to the new content, you get to this new expansion, you played through everything on merciless, you start the new content on normal and then work your way through sequentially?
That's right. When you get the expansion, you can choose to play in the challenge league and play on normal like everyone else and see the content with a fresh character.
Yeah. Cool. Now, I have heard that the challenge level in Path of Exile is not for the faint of heart. Any changes coming up in this expansion, or are you happy with where the challenge level is for players right now?
We're trying to always make sure that normal difficulty is something that most gamers can play. Like, my goal, basically, I think the way I phrased this is I want my mother to get through normal difficulty, I want my wife to get through the second difficulty, and I want my sister to get through the third difficulty, because that's the list of how much play experience those three people have had, in terms of family members, and how much games they play.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think we're at the stage where my mother can play through normal difficulty, even though she's 64. But as you say, it can be pretty challenging. So we're constantly both trying to work against that fact and also against that stigma to make sure that people do give Path of Exile a try.
Right. Oh, and that sounds. I again, talking about playing with groups and playing with family. Many games I have played through actually with my mother-in-law. And we have played through, I remember Dungeons & Dragons was the big one, and it was always quite interesting. So I completely understand your analogy for talking about the difficulty levels. So you said you've been on the team since the very beginning. I mean, now you're getting into your fourth expansion. What has this ride been like where you launched this game, you found a passionate player base, and you're now in your fourth expansion when there's a lot of games that don't make it to their first?
It's an amazing journey working on Path of Exile, and we're lucky to have a community that will support us through it. And as you say, many games don't necessarily reach their first expansion, but our community is voraciously clamoring for expansions. They want more stuff to do, and we try to deliver it, and then they enjoy it, and then they want more stuff again. And we sell supporter packs to them, and they buy enough packs that we can keep making expansions. So this is a cycle we're very happy to be on.
Right, and it is a free-to-play game, right?
That's correct, yeah.
We didn't mention it. We should have mentioned that off the top. That would have been... I should have done that.
That's okay.
So, again, you've been on this team for a long time. When the game launched, did you have a specific class that called to you, and has that changed over the last few years?
It's very interesting, because back when we were developing the game, I always thought I wanted to play an archer character. I really liked archers in previous games. And so when we're developing it, I'm always keeping an eye on the development of the archer and making sure that's going to be a good class. But since then, my flavor has kind of changed, like on a weekly basis, based on what cool stuff we encounter during development, because I'm seeing so much future stuff, and there's always one character that stands out to me. So I play it a bunch on our test server, and then another one comes calling. And so I have to say, since release, I honestly haven't had a favorite class, because I get a chance to play all of them on our internal servers when preparing for the next expansion. You
are a man after my own heart. I am very much an altaholic in pretty much every game that I've ever played. And it's just that call. Sometimes it's, you're looking at something new on the test servers, or, something just catches your eye that day. So what are you playing recently? If the last time you logged into the game, what were you playing?
So the last time I was logged into the game, I was playing a flame totem character. So this is a build where you, instead of fighting the enemies directly, you summon a totem that incinerates them with a flamethrower-like effect. And this is fun for a couple of reasons. For a start, it involves you running around distracting the monsters and the totem doing the work, so you don't have to aim. But it also lets you kind of go all in on having more totems, and they don't have to... if you have multiple totems, you can have it so you can't even do damage yourself. You're relying entirely on the totems. And then you have questions like, well, how do you deal with the fact that some monsters are resistant to fire? And so you can use techniques for converting the fire damage to a different element and so on.
Oh, wow. Now that just sounds like you really have to be on top of things to be able to play that, because you have to change things on the fly as you're playing. Right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of tools for this.
Yeah.
Like from the point of view, like we've given skills, we've got passives,
Right.
we've got unique items you can put on this. There's where possible, we try to give 5 different solutions to the same problem and let players pick whichever one works best for them.
Wow. So when this launches and you're going to jump in, are you going to be someone who are you a completionist? Do you like to get the most out of each experience as you go through, or are you the type who likes to get right through all the content as fast as you can, and then okay, you're going to go back and play through the labyrinth a bunch more?
That's a good question. Typically, I'm a bit more of a completionist, but what I want to do is play more with the actual players at the end game stuff that requires you to kind of go fast
Right.
and reach the higher levels. Because typically, I mostly play on a test service. When I'm playing with a live server, I never reach a high enough level to get community cred visibly. I play a lot of the game that they can't see, but then they class me as a noob, and that's not necessarily good for one of the lead developers, where people think, he doesn't play very much.
You know what? That is something that I have heard from so many developers, is that they are never the best players in the game because they spend most of their day building the game, whereas their players spend most of the day playing the game.
Yep, that's very true. And the job of developing games, especially when you're one of the senior people in the company, can be a 10-hour day thing for a while during expansion releases and stuff. So there isn't very much time for personal gaming outside of that, unless you're really good at work-life balance.
So that's always just realize this. Everybody who's listening right now or watching, just realize that person you're calling a noob might be just the developer on his live character, and that's who you're playing with, calling a noob. They do know what they're doing.
Yeah, and we try to play incognito where we can, because as soon as you're typing in colored text and acting like a god in game, then everyone treats you differently, and you don't get the right experience. People make it too easy for you. They trade you stuff for free, and that's not the right way to play.
Or they carry you through something. Oh, come, I'll carry you through this. It'll be fun, really. Well, that's not the experience.
While they reinforce the noob thing at the same time. I had to carry him in his own game.
But can you imagine the cred that guy would get with his friends? Hey, yeah, I'm so good. I carried a dev through. Yeah.
Yep. They live for that.
Yeah. So this is a very exciting 4th expansion that you're coming out with now. Whole new subclasses, 9, I believe that you said. I think, was it 3 acts that you said in this new story?
So the new story here has 6 new trials in the world that leads up to the labyrinth, which has 3 sections to it. But yeah.
Awesome. So that's quite a lot of content, a lot of things for people to jump into. So as I'm sure some of our listeners will never have played the game before, what class would you recommend for them as they're jumping in? Just something that's going to give them a lot of survivability, that they're going to be able to get through, get a good experience with the game, and then they can come back and pick something that fits their play style better, maybe.
I think they'd probably enjoy the Marauder. I think that its choices that they will get will be very appealing to them, especially if they want survivability, and that they can't go wrong with that class.
Awesome. So when are we looking at launch for the new expansion?
Early 2016, basically after the Christmas period. We'll be announcing a date soon, hopefully, but definitely early in Q1.
And for your player base right now, are you doing any internal testing that you're inviting beta testers into?
We may run an internal alpha test over the holiday season. We haven't hashed out the details of that yet, but if people want to play Path of Exile between now and then, on December 11th, we'll be releasing some new challenge leagues, and there's a whole content patch that goes alongside that we haven't been promoting as heavily because it confuses the message to talk about 2 things at the same time. But there's stuff happening in Path of Exile now as well as early next year if they're keen to play.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. It's fantastic to talk to you.
You're welcome. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for watching the video, everybody. Don't forget to check out all the other podcasts at MMOReporter.com or by clicking on any of the links here. And please check out our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MMOReporter. Thanks, everyone, and see you in game.